On the line is that economist. Leith Van Onselen is the chief economist and co-founder of Macro Business. He's also a former economist with the Victorian Treasury. Thanks for your time today, Leith.
Yeah, g'day, Jackie. Thanks for having me.
Now, you've written a piece for Macro Business today saying about this one-way track to financial disaster. So in your view, will our credit rating drop?
Yeah, look, it certainly could. Look, Victoria has the most debt in the nation out of all the states. It's also got the lowest credit rating and it has the worst debt trajectory. So global ratings agency Standard & Poor's forecast this year that Victoria's debt could hit $250 billion by 2027, and that's up from just under $60 billion in 2019. So we've had massive growth, and unfortunately...
Oh, is your phone ringing, Leith?
Yes, I don't know what happened there. I'm sorry about that.
You're right. So we're just on debt. Can you explain it to our listeners? And if someone's tuning in, why does a AAA credit rating, or as we have now, a AA credit rating, why does that matter?
Yeah, so look, it matters because a little bit like your mortgage, if your credit rating gets downgraded, it basically means that interest rate goes up. So according to reports, if Victoria's credit rating gets downgraded one notch, which is basically what's been speculated here, we could end up paying roughly 0.5% more in our interest on our debt. Now, when you're dealing with huge volumes of debt, $240 billion according to S&P by 2027, that obviously means that we're going to be paying a much higher debt load, and that's obviously not something that we want. And there is another aspect here, Jackie. If we do proceed with this project, it's estimated to cost $200 billion once all the three stages are done. That's an enormous amount of money. That's going to effectively soak up Victoria's infrastructure budget for potentially a decade or more. And what that means is that if you live in a growth area like West of Melbourne, for example, where you're starved of infrastructure, you've got loads of population growth, that means that you won't get infrastructure because the budget has been blown on this single project, which I'd argue isn't needed. I mean, who's clamouring to catch a train from Box Hill to Cheltenham?
Well, no one, and that's the problem, isn't it? And you make a great point about the west of Melbourne and indeed further west, even further out on the fringes as well. We speak to so many callers on this program, Leith, who are in the west, who are traditional Labor voters who feel that they have been absolutely sold a pup, that they have had no investment in their suburbs compared to other parts of Melbourne. And I had Kosamaris, the pollster, in last week, and we talked a lot about this. And he said, actually, this is really starting to make an impact when it comes to voting, and people who have voted Labor their whole life are changing their minds.
Yeah, and I can understand that. I mean, again, these areas, so we're talking about, Western Melbourne, Northern Melbourne, all these places that have got rapid population growth have basically been starved of infrastructure. They don't have enough obviously, train infrastructure, not enough roads, etc., hospitals, schools, the whole box and dice. And if we're going to spend, $200 billion on this single project, where is money going to come from for all these other areas? And all these people who are basically in these growth areas are going to be starved of infrastructure, which means their quality of life is going to be degraded. And I'd argue that it's not a good use of funds just to blow it all on this one single project that, let's be honest, it was the brainchild of the former Premier, Dan Andrews, as a sort of quick announceable in the 2018 election. He announced it with a $50 billion price tag. It's now quadrupled that. And it didn't stack up at $50 billion. The Auditor General warned on it back then, and it certainly doesn't stack up at $200 billion, which is the now current proposed cost of the whole thing.
So if you were the government now, it's interesting there's reports saying that Cabinet, there's a bit of tension within Cabinet because they're not sure, not everyone is right on line with Jacinta, who has said, even on this program last week, that it's a project that we cannot afford not to have. Do you think the mood is shifting in Cabinet?
I hope so. But the problem we got here is even if we did, cancel the contracts, we'll be up for a massive compensation bill. So, Jacinta Allen, I'd say stupidly, chose to sign these contracts late last year, against expert advice, just to try and, force it through. And we could be left in a Commonwealth Games situation, whereby if we cancel the project, we'll be up for billions of dollars of compensation. And is that something we really want? So we're kind of damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. This project could potentially bankrupt the state.
So if that's the case, what should we do?
It's a good question. I mean, ideally you would cancel it, but, how much compensation are we going to be up for? I mean, this was a blatant error by the Victorian government. Should never have signed these contracts. There isn't an infrastructure expert in the country who backed this project. There was warnings left, right and centre. Whether it's the Grattan Institute or other infrastructure experts or even the Victorian Auditor General. who were cautioning against this project, and they went ahead and signed it anyway against expert advice. And now we've been left with this ginormous millstone around our neck at a time when the state's already massively in debt. So it's basically a financial disaster in the making.
So do you truly believe that if we went ahead with this, it would bankrupt Victoria?
No. So, look, I must admit, I was being a little bit hyperbolic there, but it will certainly put us in a very bad position of, perpetual debt, cutbacks, rising taxes, and degraded credit rating. So it's a disaster. And we, as you said at the start, we don't really have that many assets to sell off now to try and pay back the debt. So this will just have to be the old-fashioned way of putting up taxes and cutting back services and cutting back other infrastructure to try and make way for this project.
What about cutting back the level of public service in this state or public servants? As a former economist with the Victorian Treasury, what's your view on the one-off bonus this year of $5,600 for public servants?
Look, I think the public sector workforce in Victoria is way over-bloated. So some data came out from the ABS earlier in the year. Now, this is up to the 2022-23 financial year. And what it showed is that if Victoria's public sector workforce expanded by 59% in numbers terms in 15 years, and that was well in excess of the 29% increase in the state's population. And as a result, the public service wage bill also soared by 152% over the same 15-year period. So the fact of the matter is, unfortunately, Victoria has way too many bureaucrats working in the public service, and as a result, we have a wage bill that's projected to hit about $40 billion in a few years annually, which is just an enormous amount to be spending on public service.
So is that the number one thing? If you can't cancel the Suburban Rail Loop, because it sounds like we can't just keep paying off contracts for things we never build, but what do we do to bring down the debt? Is it reducing the public service? Is that the first stop?
Yeah, that's certainly one of the things we should do. We should also try and not build more over-bloated, expensive infrastructure projects. But we are caught between a rock and a hard place because Victoria's population is growing like a science experiment because of the federal government's mass immigration. So Victoria's population, Melbourne's population is projected to hit 9 million by 2056, right? And we were 3.5 million at the turn of the century. So it took us 170 years to get to 3.5 million, and we're supposed to get to 9 million in just another 56 years. So that there is a problem. And obviously, if we're going to have that sort of population growth, we do need infrastructure. Otherwise, we're just going to get crush loaded. But at the same time, we can't throw money away on silly projects like the Suburban Rail Loop. And I'd even argue the North East Link. That was estimated to cost $15.8 billion. It's now blown out to $26 billion. So that's a $10 billion cost blowout. And we've had cost blowouts across just about every single infrastructure project.
Yeah, Leith, you've got to factor in the extra cost of having the CFMEU on site as well. Leith Van Alten is the chief economist and co-founder of Macro Business. He's also a former economist with the Victorian Treasury. I appreciate your time today, Leith.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie.